Well, Donald Trump and his administration have ramped up their criticism of the coverage of the war in Iran. Polls show that a majority of the American public does not approve of the military operation, and the U.S. president has accused media outlets of not being patriotic simply because they're not portraying the war in glowing terms. The Federal Communications Commission has even threatened to revoke licenses of broadcasters for what the Trump administration has referred to as distortions and lies. Selena Sykes has the details.
5,000 Marines and sailors. Can you explain why you're
very obnoxious person?
Berating reporters, accusing American news organizations of disloyalty to their country, and threatening to remove networks' licenses. The Trump administration is ramping up its attacks on the media over its coverage of the war in the Middle East. Last week, U.S. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth used a Pentagon briefing to scold media outlets for what he deemed insufficiently positive coverage of the war, going as far as making his own suggestions for headlines.
Another example of a fake headline that I saw yesterday: war widening. Here's a real headline for you for an actual patriotic press. How about Iran shrinking, going underground?
Meanwhile, top media regulator Brendan Carr, who was appointed by Donald Trump to the Federal Communications Commission last year, issued an explicit warning to television networks on social media.
Broadcasters that are running hoaxes and news distortions, also known as the fake news, have a chance now to correct course before their license renewals come up.
A threat that Trump said he was so thrilled to see. The FCC does not regulate networks like CBS, NBC and ABC, but it does have the authority to reject licenses of individual affiliates of those networks when they come up for renewal. Cable networks such as CNN are not under the FCC's purview. Though for its critics, Carr's declaration is part of an intimidation campaign by Trump and his allies against the freedom of the press under the First Amendment.
And for more on this story, I'm joined by Bob Korn-Revere, Chief Counsel for the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. He's also former Chief Counsel to former FCC Chairman James Quaylo. Thanks so much for being with us here on France 24. You know, for years, Donald Trump has referred to the media as the enemy of the people. But in the last year, his administration's assault on the American media has really escalated, I think it's fair to say. He's accused media outlets of sharing lies and even committing treason. In your view, has the American media been fair when it comes to its coverage of this war in Iran?
I think, well, the media has been covering this war the way it covers any war. Some of it is more favorable to the administration, some of it less. But the question of whether or not the government can take direct action against the press because it doesn't like the way it's reporting is totally foreign to our system. It's something that the First Amendment would never permit, and it's something that the Federal Communications Commission has no authority to do.
Yeah, you mentioned the FCC. For decades, the FCC has been an independent agency, but under Brendan Carr, that seems to have changed. He's threatening to revoke broadcast licenses of media outlets for their war coverage. I think you're the perfect person to ask this. Have we ever seen the FCC used in this way?
No, we have not. We've never seen the FCC be this nakedly political or to define itself as a mere extension of the presidency. The FCC was created in the 1930s to be an independent regulatory agency, but something that the current chairman of the FCC seems to have forgotten.
Do you feel like this is troubling, looking at what we're seeing right now?
Well, it's troubling in that, having worked at the FCC and, as with other FCC officials, taken an oath of office to uphold the Constitution of the United States, I find it painful personally to see the agency, prostituted in this way. I don't think it has much impact in terms of what's going to happen legally. Television licenses are not even supposed to begin coming up for renewal until after this administration will be out of office. So it is simply a threat being wielded by a powerful regulator to try and condition the behavior of broadcast stations.
Now, the White House has been very critical of how the war is being covered, as we saw in that report. Donald Trump's Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, has really taken this to a new level. He recently tried to, rewrite newspaper headlines from the podium, literally telling journalists how to do their job. Hegseth seems to think that journalists should be stenographers, just writing down whatever he says. Is that how you interpret this?
That's not how journalism works. And Hegseth also was reported to have banned photographers from the Pentagon for failing to take flattering pictures of him. It's really a different manifestations of the same malady, the same problem. You have powerful people in government thinking they can control what the coverage is and how the press is supposed to report about them and about the events that they're responsible for.
Now, we recently saw a journalist who was arrested while doing his job, Don Lemon, a former anchor at CNN. He was reporting on a protest at a church in Minnesota. He was arrested. He now faces criminal charges. Of course, Don Lemon was a former target of Donald Trump during Trump's first term. How is this any different from an authoritarian like Vladimir Putin, targeting and prosecuting journalists that he sees as a threat?
Well, this is how authoritarian governments operate. They target either individual reporters, as the president has done, or they target the press in general. Whenever it is perceived to be unfavorable to them, they will take whatever action within their authority, which they think is within their authority, to take. Now, there is a difference between Vladimir Putin, who has murdered journalists, and the kinds of things going on here. But what is happening in this country right now is, as I mentioned before, foreign to our system of free press.
Now, there have been changes at CBS, since Barry Weiss took over, the former head of the Free Press. Perhaps changes will be coming to CNN with David Ellison at the helm, with that deal in its final stages. How would you evaluate the general health of journalism, of the journalism landscape in the U.S. at the moment?
Well, I think we're in the middle of a significant challenge. Part of the problem is that when you have these efforts by government to put pressure on media institutions, it is incumbent upon those institutions to stand on their rights and to assert their independence. There have also been a troubling number of private lawsuits brought by the president against news organizations, private lawsuits that have no legal merit whatsoever, but have resulted in settlements because of the pressure that the president has been able to bring through his regulatory agencies.
Now, the White House has posted a number of what you'd have to say are propaganda videos to its official social media sites with music, explosions, portraying the war as a video game. How do you square that with the administration's criticism of responsible messaging when it comes to a war, where people are losing their lives?
Well, I think in general, when you have coverage that doesn't attribute the seriousness to being at war that is demanded of that kind of national act, that is a concern. And it's a concern in the way that it is being portrayed. And it's concern for how news organizations view their ethical obligations.
Do you think there are reliable sources of information, media? I know there are reliable sources of information in the U.S., but do you think that information is getting to the general American public?
I think there are reliable sources of information, but because we have so many sources from online sources, broadcast sources, and on cable, all of that requires people to be more vigilant to try and vet the information that they get. Fortunately, there are also evolving various kinds of organizations to help people evaluate whether or not a news source is trustworthy or not. But it does require citizens to exercise more vigilance in trying to determine what is reliable news and what isn't. The one thing that is certain is that you can't really trust the government to say whether something is, as they would say, fake news or legitimate news. That's something that we have to evaluate for ourselves, and that's what a free press demands.
And certainly we invite anyone to watch France 24. We're always striving to be a reliable source of information. Bob Corn-Revere, Chief Counsel for the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. Thanks very much for joining us tonight on France 24. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much.